Consider this a gift to remember us by.
You don't belong here!
I remember this.
That was absolutely magnificent, Renata.
She's just a thief!
Enough, Jimena.
Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. I'm really hoping to break through the magical barrier of 1,000 subscribers. That number holds a special significance for me. Hit that subscribe button, it's just one click. But for me, it's a huge boost of motivation to create my next video. Thank you in advance. If you play this violin, I'll marry you right here, right now. I accept. Impossible. It can't be. I don't believe it. She's magnificent. If you play this violin, I'll marry you right here, right now. The millionaire scoffed, but she'd taken everyone's bet. If you play this violin, I'll marry you right here, right now. The phrase landed in the ballroom like a crystal goblet shattering against marble. For a full second, no one breathed. Then came the laughter. First a single, shy, almost embarrassed chuckle. Then another, and another, until 200 guests in formal attire were roaring with laughter, hands in gloves pressed to their mouths, leaning on their companions' shoulders to murmur the same thought. What elegant cruelty, what delicious humiliation. Renata Salazar stood in the center of the room, a silver tray trembling slightly in her hands. The reflections of the crystal chandeliers shattered into 1,000 pieces across the golden liquid. She was 27, wearing the blue and white uniform of the Andrade Mansion's maids. A navy dress, a starched apron, an immaculate collar, her brown hair pulled back into a low bun, and green eyes fixed on the polished parquet floor, as if she could disappear into it. "Didn't you hear me?" insisted Maximiliano Andrade, stepping forward with the smile of a man who had never lost anything in his life. He was 30, his dark hair perfectly slicked back, a tailored black tuxedo emphasizing a body honed by Sunday polo matches. He held a honey-colored wooden violin in one hand, extending it to her like one might offer a bone to a stray dog, curious if it would jump. His other arm was held behind his back, a pose from an old portrait. He was the owner of the house, heir to the country's largest real estate empire, and that night he was celebrating his 31st birthday, surrounded by the city's wealthiest elite. "I'm making you a serious offer," he continued, raising his voice for all to enjoy. "This violin belonged to my grandmother, the Countess of Andrade. It's worth more than 10 years of your salary, and I swear to all these witnesses, if you play it, if you can coax even one decent melody from it, I'll marry you right here, tonight." The laughter erupted again, louder. A woman let out a delighted shriek. Someone applauded. Enchanted with the show, a man with a mustache and a cigar bellowed, "Do it, Max! Let the maid play! Let her play! Let her play!" Two young men with glasses in hand chanted. Renata felt her face burn. Not from shame, though shame was there, thick as smoke. It burned from something else she dared not name. Something buried for 8 years beneath the apron, beneath the floors she scrubbed on her knees, beneath the silence she had learned to live in. It had all begun 15 minutes earlier with a clumsy accident. She had been crossing the ballroom with the tray, weaving through the guests, when a gentleman backed up without looking and elbowed her. 3 glasses tipped over. Champagne splashed onto the silk décolletage of Doña Jimena Castellanos, the most feared woman in that society. The very one who had spent months weaving her web around Maximiliano with the patience of a waiting spider. "Stupid!" Jimena had shrieked, jumping up, the stains spreading across her ivory dress. "Look what you've done. Do you know how much this dress costs? More than you're worth whole." "I'm sorry, ma'am," Renata murmured, pulling a handkerchief from her apron. "Allow me. Don't touch me." Jimena slapped her hand away. "Have someone throw her out." "Max, darling, tell me you'll fire this clumsy thing." And then Maximiliano, who had been observing the scene with a drink in hand and the elegant boredom of one who has seen it all, smiled. It was a slow smile. The smile of a cat discovering a new mouse to play with. "Firing her would be too easy," he said. "Why don't we have a little fun first?" He walked to the far wall, where the Countess's violin rested in a lighted glass display case, a family relic that hadn't been touched in 30 years. He took it out with theatrical care, weighed it in his hand, and turned back to Renata with that phrase that now hung in the poisoned air of the ballroom. "If you play this violin, I'll marry you right here, right now." "Come on," said Jimena, recovering, sensing the game and eager to be part of the cruelty. "Let her play. It'll be funny to see a maid scratching that thing like a dying cat. Then we'll throw her out and have a good laugh." Renata raised her eyes for the first time. She didn't look at Jimena. She didn't look at the crowd that pressed in on her like a wall of silk and diamonds. She looked at the violin, and her heart stopped. She recognized it, not the instrument itself. She had never seen that particular instrument before, but what it represented, the perfect curve of the wooden body, the golden varnish worn in the exact spot where the chin of generations of musicians had rested, the ebony pegs, the string, the slightly out-of-tune A string, noticed with a glance, like noticing an old friend has aged. Her hands, holding the tray, remembered something her will had spent years forcing into oblivion. Well, Maximiliano waved the violin in the air. Are you going to stand there like a statue? I'm offering you the opportunity of a lifetime, girl. A maid becoming Mrs. Andrade? It's the dream of any woman of your class, isn't it? He turned to the crowd, spreading his arms. Generous of me, isn't it? I'm even giving her a chance. The ballroom roared with laughter. A woman seated near the grand piano leaned toward her husband and whispered loudly enough for Renata to hear. Poor creature. She's going to make a fool of herself and be on the street tomorrow. What times? But another guest, younger, frowned. Something in the maid's stillness unsettled her. It wasn't the stillness of terror. It was something else. It was the stillness of very deep water. Doña Remedios, the mansion's cook, had come out of the kitchen, drawn by the commotion, and stopped at the threshold, a dishcloth clutched to her chest. Beside her, Tomas, the young butler with clumsy hands, swallowed hard. Poor Renata, Tomas murmured. We have to get her out of there. Hush, said Doña Remedios, her eyes never leaving the girl. Hush and watch, because Doña Remedios knew her. She had spent 2 years watching her scrub floors, peel potatoes, sleep in the cold little room by the pantry. And in 2 years, only once, on a stormy dawn, had she seen Renata standing by the kitchen window, her fingers moving in the air as if playing an invisible instrument, an expression on her face that was neither servant nor poor, nor of this world. It was the expression of someone remembering having had wings. Jimena, unable to bear not being the center of attention, approached with a swagger and circled Renata like a vulture inspecting its prey. Look at her, she said, addressing the guests with a venomous smile. Her hands red from scrubbing, her 3-peso uniform, and those green eyes. Where did a maid get eyes like that? She must have stolen them from someone. She let out a little laugh, and several ladies imitated her. Come on, girl, play. Show us what you're made of, or confess once and for all that you're nothing more than what you appear to be. Nothing. Renata didn't answer, but something stirred within her. Slowly, like a sheet of ice beginning to crack after a whole winter. For 8 years, she had accepted the insults, the indifference, the weight of the trays, and the cold of the little room by the pantry. She had learned that silence was a form of survival, that if one made oneself small, invisible, transparent, the world would eventually leave her alone. But tonight, the world had placed a violin in front of her face. And a violin is not just any object to someone who was once capable of making 1,000 strangers weep with 4 strings and a bow. Poor fool. Jimena insisted, losing patience with this silence that was beginning to disturb her, though she didn't know why. She doesn't even understand what's being offered. Are you going to play or not? Maximiliano's voice lost its charm and gained a sharp edge of impatience. Look, I'll make it easy for you. He advanced to within a meter of her and held out the violin, almost touching her chest. Take it. Make me laugh. That's all I ask. And if you refuse, tomorrow morning you'll pack your things and leave my house without a letter of recommendation, so choose humiliation or the street. A new silence fell over the ballroom. This time, it wasn't the silence of restrained laughter. It was the silence of anticipation. 300 eyes fixed on a woman in a blue uniform, holding a silver tray as if it were the last thing keeping her tethered to the earth. Renata closed her eyes for a second, and in the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw it all again. The immense stage, the bright lights, the roar of the standing ovation, her name written in gold letters on the program, her father's hands trembling with pride in the front row. She heard the applause again. She also heard the screech of brakes, the shattering glass, the silence that followed, a silence that lasted 8 years. She opened her eyes with a calm that froze the blood of those closest to her. Renata bent down and placed the silver tray on the floor next to her low-heeled black shoes. The glasses tinkled once and fell still. She straightened up. She removed her white service gloves one by one without haste and let them fall onto the tray. And then, to the astonishment of an entire room that expected the spectacle of a servant making a fool of herself, she extended both hands toward the Countess of Andrade's violin. Maximiliano smiled triumphantly. He didn't know, he couldn't know, that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. the invisible maid. 12 hours before picking up the violin that would change her life, Renata Salazar was on her knees, scrubbing the floor of the Andrade Mansion's foyer, and no one in the world would have imagined who she had been. It was 5 in the morning, the house slept. Only she was awake, as she was every dawn, gliding the damp cloth over the white marble until the first light of day could reflect upon it. She liked that hour. It was the only time the enormous mansion, with its 30 rooms, its high-ceilinged ballrooms, its portraits of stern ancestors, belonged to her a little. At that hour, there were no doorbells, no orders, no Doña Jimena's shrill voice demanding her breakfast. Only silence, water, and her own hands moving in circles. "You'll wear out the floor, my daughter," said Doña Remedios, appearing from the kitchen with 2 cups of steaming coffee. "That marble already shines more than my bald head, and my bald head is a sight to behold. Come, rest a bit." Renata looked up and smiled. Doña Remedios was a 60-year-old woman, wide of hip and laugh, with an apron that always smelled of cinnamon and onions. She was the closest thing to a mother Renata had had in a long time. "Thank you, Doña Reme," she murmured, drying her hands on her apron and accepting the cup. "But if I don't finish before they wake up, you know how the lady gets." "She'll get hysterical," the cook huffed, sitting down heavily on the last step of the marble staircase, "even if we served her breakfast on a golden platter with little angels singing. That woman didn't come to this house to be happy. She came to hunt the master, and until he puts the ring on her finger, she'll take it out on anyone she can, which is you." Renata took a sip of coffee and said nothing. She knew Doña Remedios was right. Jimena Castellanos had been installed in the mansion for 6 months under the pretense of being a friend of the family, but all the household staff knew the truth. She was determined to become Mrs. Andrade, no matter the cost. And Renata, young, quiet, and possessing a beauty that even the uniform couldn't entirely hide, was, to Jimena, a blemish that needed to be erased. "Look here," said Doña Remedios, lowering her voice, though no one was near. "Is it true what they say? That the master's throwing a huge party tonight? That even the governor and those TV folks are coming?" "It's my birthday, the 31st, Renata replied. "Tomas says there are over 200 guests. We have to have everything ready by 8. "The 31st, the cook murmured, shaking her head, and still with that sour face. "To have all the money in the world and always act like everyone owes you something. That boy wasn't always like this, you know? I knew him as a child when the Countess lived here. He was sweet, he used to laugh. But when his parents died in that plane crash," she clicked her tongue. "Money makes you master of everything but the one thing that matters." Renata listened in silence. She had learned in her 2 years in that house that sorrow knew no social classes. She, who slept in a cold little room next to the pantry, and Maximiliano Andrade, who slept in a suite the size of a church, perhaps shared more than either of them suspected. Both carried a dead weight on their backs. The following hours passed in a whirlwind. Florists arrived with arrangements the size of trees. Hired waiters in black arrived. The orchestra arrived, tuning their instruments in a corner of the grand hall, while technicians hung garlands of lights. Amidst the chaos, Tomas, the young butler, appeared, carrying a tower of plates so high he could barely see over it. "Renata, Renata, help me," he panted. "If I drop these plates, Doña Jimena will hang me from the main chandelier and leave me there as decoration." "Use 2 hands, Tomas, not 1, she laughed, taking half the stack. "You always want to carry everything in 1 trip. If I make 2 trips, they'll scold me for being slow, and if I make 1, they'll scold me for being clumsy," the young man sighed dramatically. "In this house, you lose no matter what you win. Hey, is it true a famous singer is coming tonight? Because if she is, I'm going to ask for her autograph, even if they fire me." "What's coming is work, Tomas. A lot of work." "You? And your poetry?" he joked, and staggered away with his half stack of plates, narrowly avoiding a florist. Renata followed him with her eyes and smiled for a moment. It was them, the ones from below, Doña Remedios, Tomas, the other maids, who made life bearable in that cold marble house. Among them, there was a simple loyalty that money couldn't buy, nor Jimena's cruelty destroy. And then, of course, Jimena's voice sliced through the house like a knife. "You, the one with the green eyes, what's your name? Doesn't matter. Come up to my room and iron the ivory dress I left on the bed. And if you make a single pleat wrong, I swear you'll be out of a job. Understood?" Renata stopped short, a pile of tablecloths in her arms. "Yes, ma'am." "Yes, ma'am," Jimena repeated, mimicking her with a cruel grimace. How obedient. Those of your class know their place. That must be acknowledged. Renata went up the stairs without answering. She had learned that responding only prolonged the punishment. In Jimena's bedroom, as she ironed the silk dress with careful hands, she allowed herself for a moment to look in the large gilded mirror. A maid looked back at her, pale, thin, with shadows under her green eyes. A stranger. "Who are you?" she asked the reflection. "Where did the other one go?" Because there had been another, a Renata who existed 8 years ago in another city with another surname shining on theater marquees. A child prodigy who, at 7, was already playing entire concertos from memory, who at 12 had debuted as a soloist, who at 19 was called the Miracle of the Strings by the country's most severe critics. Renata Salazar, the violinist, the one who made entire halls weep, the one who had a golden future written before her until that rainy night. She closed her eyes for a moment, and the image came unbidden, as it always did when she let her guard down. Her father's car skidding on the wet asphalt, the truck's headlights blinding them, the scream, the impact. Her father had been her teacher, her manager, her best friend. He died instantly, and Renata, who was in the passenger seat on her way to the most important presentation of her career, survived with a shattered hand and a broken heart in a place no doctor could mend. They rebuilt the bones, told her that with therapy she might play again, but what had broken was not in her hand, it was deeper within. Every time she picked up the bow, she saw the truck's headlights. Every time she rested the violin on her chin, she heard her father's scream. And one day, without telling anyone, she sold her violin, packed the newspaper clippings in a box, changed cities and lives, and became what the world now saw. A servant with no past, no name, no music. "Are you done with the dress?" Jimena's voice ripped her from the memory. "You've been in there an hour. Bring it down and come help downstairs, you useless thing." Renata carefully brought down the dress. That very garment, hours later, would receive 3 spilled glasses of champagne and unleash humiliation in front of 200 people. But she didn't know that yet. The party began at 8 sharp. The mansion filled with jewels, expensive perfumes, false laughter, and conversations about money. Renata circulated among the guests with her tray, invisible as good service should be, a blue and white shadow offering champagne without anyone seeing her. And then near midnight, something happened that stopped her in her tracks. The orchestra took a break, and to entertain the guests during the intermission, someone played recorded music through the hall's speakers. The first notes floated on the perfumed air, and Renata felt the floor open up beneath her feet. It was Meditation from Thais, the piece she had played at her last concert, the piece she had buried for 8 years. The tray trembled in her hands. A glass tilted precariously. For a second, just 1 second, she closed her eyes and let the melody pierce her like a knife of light. Her fingers, against her will, moved almost imperceptibly in the air, recalling a fingering her mind had tried to forget, but that her hands held like a hidden treasure. Doña Remedios, passing by at that moment with an empty platter, was the only one who saw it. She stopped. She looked at the girl with closed eyes and dancing fingers in the air, and something in her mother's heart tightened. "My daughter," she whispered. "Are you all right?" Renata's eyes snapped open. The melody was still playing. She swallowed, regained her posture, and feigned a service smile. "Perfectly, Doña Reme," she lied. "I was just distracted for a moment." But it wasn't true. Something had awakened within her that night. Something that had been dormant for 8 years and would no longer be silenced. She didn't know it yet, but it was 15 minutes before a rich and arrogant man would spill a glass, utter an insult, and place in her hands the destiny she thought she had lost forever. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 1/4 to midnight, and somewhere in the hall, Doña Jimena Castellanos was already scanning for an excuse to humiliate the green-eyed maid. The silence of the hall. Renata picked up the violin. She did it with a delicacy that didn't fit her reddened, dish-scrubbing hands, with a reverence that made more than one guest frown, not understanding. She didn't grasp it like a foreign object. A common person would hold it like a living being reunited after a long time. Maximiliano handed her the bow with a mocking smile. "Here's your little stick," he said, and the hall laughed one last time. "Let's see what noise you can make." Renata accepted the bow without looking at him. The only thing that existed for her in that instant was the familiar weight of the wood, the smell of varnish and resin, the cold curve of her chin settling into its exact place as if it had never left. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and the entire hall, those 200 guests, who a minute before were laughing out loud, felt the air change without knowing why. She raised the bow, placed it on the strings, and then played the first note. It wasn't a squeak. It wasn't the dying cat Jimena had promised. It was a long, pure, round sound that rose above the diamond-adorned heads and climbed to the crystal chandeliers, making them vibrate. A single, sustained, perfect note that sliced through the hall like a stream of ice water and left everyone petrified. Laughter died in 200 throats at once. Renata recognized the melody that her own fingers had chosen without consulting her. Meditation from Thais, the same one that had played through the speakers 15 minutes earlier, the same one she had played 8 years ago. The last night she was Renata Salazar, the violinist. The piece flowed from her not as a memory, but as a wound that finally opened to bleed for all to see. The bow rose and fell with impossible softness. The melody unfolded through the hall, sweet and heart-wrenching at the same time, filled with a pain so ancient and so beautiful that people didn't know what to do with it. A lady who moments before had been jeering brought her gloved hand to her lips. An old man sitting by the piano closed his eyes. A young woman felt her eyelashes moisten without knowing why, because that was the terrible and glorious thing about that music. It didn't enter through the ears, it entered through the chest. It spoke directly to the part of everyone that had ever lost something, a love, a parent, a version of themselves, and made them remember. Renata was no longer in the hall. She had disappeared into the piece as she used to disappear as a child when the whole world was reduced to 4 strings and the beat of her own heart. Her body moved with the music, swaying slightly, her brow furrowed in concentration, her lips slightly parted. The blue and white maid's uniform no longer looked like a uniform. It looked like a costume that was finally falling apart to reveal what had always been underneath. And as she played, the memories returned, but this time not as knives, they returned as waves. She saw her father's face in the front row of a theater, wiping away tears with a crumpled handkerchief. She heard his deep voice whispering in her ear before every concert. "Don't play for them, my daughter. Play for those who are no longer here." Music is the only language that crosses to the other side. For 8 years, Renata had fled those words because they hurt too much. That night, for the first time, she let them in, and she played for her father. She played for the child she had been. She played for everything she had lost on that wet highway, and each note was a tear she didn't allow herself to cry aloud. In the last row of the hall, a gentleman with white hair and an impeccable suit leaned forward in his chair, squinting. It was Don Augusto Belmonte, a longtime patron of the Capital Symphony Orchestra, a man who had heard the world's greatest violinists in 60 years of concerts. And something in that phrasing, in the way the girl attacked the long notes, stirred a buried memory. "I've heard playing like this before," he thought. "A long time ago, but where?" Maximiliano Andrade had stopped smiling. Standing 3 steps away from her, the forgotten champagne glass in his hand, he looked at the maid as if seeing her for the first time. And in a way, he was. This woman whom he had despised, whom he had used as entertainment for his rich guests, was playing his grandmother's violin with a level he had never heard live, not even in the concerts his mother dragged him to as a child. The mockery had frozen on his face, and little by little it transformed into something else, astonishment, bewilderment, and in the depths of his eyes, something akin to shame. But there was something more, something Maximiliano wouldn't have confessed to anyone. That melody transported him back to his mother. The Countess had played the violin until the day she died. As a child, Maximiliano would fall asleep to the sound of those strings seeping under his bedroom door. Ever since the plane had plunged into the sea with his parents inside, he hadn't been able to bear the sound of the violin. He had banished it from his home. That's why his grandmother's instrument had been locked away in a display case for 30 years, silent as a reproach. And now, a maid had drawn it out of its silence. And without knowing it, she had opened a crack in the chest of the coldest man in the city, through which it was now seeping. After so many years, the voice of his dead mother, he clenched his jaw, felt his eyes burn, and hated himself for it. Beside him, Jimena Castellanos was living the worst moment of her life. She had imagined this instant in 1,000 ways. The maid scraping the violin, the room erupting in laughter, the humiliation, the dismissal. She had licked her lips in anticipation, but reality was exploding in her face like a slap. The maid wasn't making a fool of herself. The maid was making the most exclusive salon in the city weep. And worse still, Jimena saw how Maximiliano looked at her. She saw that new expression on the face of the man she had been pursuing for 6 months, and she knew, with a knot of hatred in her stomach, that something had just broken in her perfect plan that night. "It can't be," she muttered under her breath. "It can't be." The music swelled to its peak. Renata drew out an impossibly fine note, which trembled in the air like a thread of light about to snap, and then let it descend slowly into silence. The last sound died away, and for 3 eternal seconds, absolutely nothing happened. No one applauded, no one spoke, no one breathed. The entire salon. These businessmen and society ladies, accustomed to being impressed by nothing because they had already bought everything, were struck dumb, transfixed, incapable of feigning indifference to what they had just witnessed. Renata opened her eyes, lowered the violin, and for an instant, seeing so many faces turned towards her, so many gazes, she remembered where she was and who she was supposed to be. Panic flashed across her face like a shadow. She had forgotten the most important rule of her new life, to be invisible, and she had just, unintentionally, become the most visible person in the room. Then the applause erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was an avalanche. Two people rose almost simultaneously, chairs screeching against the parquet, hands clapping with fury, shouts of bravo bouncing off the high ceilings. The old man at the piano wept openly. The lady who had mocked her clapped with both hands above her head. Even the hired waiters, standing by the walls with their trays, clapped, forgetting their jobs. Doña Remedios, on the threshold of the kitchen, brought a rag to her face and sobbed with pride. "That's my girl," she repeated through tears. "That's my girl. I knew it. I knew it." Tomas beside her clapped like a madman with his mouth open. "Dona Reme? Renata is an artist. Did you know? Why did you never tell me?" "Because she didn't want to know herself, my boy," the cook replied. "There are pains we hide even from ourselves." In the center of the salon, Renata remained motionless under the storm of applause, overwhelmed, lost, holding the violin against her chest like a shield. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just wanted to disappear, to run away, to return to her cold little room and her safe silence, because those ovations, instead of making her happy, had flung open a door that she had sealed shut with 8 years of effort. Maximiliano took a step toward her, then another. The crowd, seeing him, gradually fell silent, sensing that the spectacle was not yet over, because everyone remembered what the owner of the house had promised in front of witnesses, loudly laughing. "If you play this violin, I'll marry you right here." And the maid had just played it like few human beings in the world would be capable of playing it. Maximiliano stopped in front of her. There was no trace of mockery left on his face. He looked into her green eyes, those eyes that now returned to him not his mission, but something he hadn't expected. An immense, serene, almost accusatory sadness. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could utter a single word, a sharp voice cut through the air from one side of the room. "One moment." Jimena Castellanos advanced towards them, her face contorted and a twisted smile that deceived no one. "Before anyone says something foolish they'll regret, there's something all of you should know about this woman." The salon hushed. Renata felt her blood turn to ice. The fascination and the serpent. "There's something all of you should know about this woman," Jimena Castellanos repeated, planting herself in the center of the room, her dress stained with champagne and her pride stained with something worse. All eyes turned to her. Renata, the violin still pressed against her chest, felt the floor move beneath her feet. "This maid," Jimena spat the word, "has been mocking all of us. Do you really think any old servant plays like that by chance? She's not a fraud, a liar who snuck into this house pretending to be poor for God knows what. Who hides talent like that while scrubbing floors? Only someone hiding something. I say she's a scammer and you should throw her out tonight before she steals the silverware." There was an uncomfortable murmur. Some guests, eager not to displease the formidable Jimena, nodded, but most shifted in their seats, uneasy, because they had just wept at that music, and no one weeps for a scammer. Maximiliano raised a hand, and the salon fell silent. "Jimena," he said, without taking his eyes off Renata. "Shut your mouth." It was as if he had slapped the woman. Jimena recoiled, white with fury, her smile frozen. "Max, darling, I just said for you to shut your mouth." Maximiliano's voice was ice. "We just heard something that none of us with all our money would be capable of buying or doing, and the only thing you can think of is spitting poison." He turned to Renata. "What's your name? Your real name, not the one on the payroll." Renata swallowed. 200 people awaited her answer. For an instant, the temptation to tell the truth. "I am Renata Salazar. I was a violinist, the miracle of the strings." It rose in her throat like a tide, but fear was stronger. If she said her name, her entire past would open its doors again. There would be questions, newspapers, pity, and she hadn't survived 8 years of silence to crumble in front of these people? Renata replied in a low voice. Just Renata. I am the maid. That's all I am. That's not true, Maximiliano said, taking a step toward her. And you know it. A maid doesn't do what you just did. Where did you learn to play like that? Who taught you? Please, she murmured, and her voice trembled for the first time. Please, Mr. Andrade, give me back my job. Let's forget all this. I didn't want to play. You forced me. I don't want any of what you promised. Not the marriage, not the attention, nothing. I just want to keep working in peace. Please. There was a strange silence. In all the years in that mansion, no woman had ever told Maximiliano Andrade, the country's most coveted bachelor, that she didn't want to marry him. Women chased him, courted him, wove webs like Jimena. And here was a maid with green eyes, begging him to let her go back to scrubbing floors, fleeing from him as if he were a punishment. Something in Maximiliano's pride stirred, but something deeper, something he didn't understand, stirred even more strongly. Curiosity, fascination. For the first time in years, someone was a true mystery to him. Pick up your tray, he said at last in a low voice, almost softly, and put the violin back in its display case. We'll talk tomorrow. This isn't over. But sir, tomorrow, Renata? She lowered her head, placed the violin on the piano with infinite care, picked up her tray from the floor, and retreated towards the kitchen amidst the murmur of 200 guests who no longer looked at her as a servant, but as an enigma. With every step she took, she felt their gazes fixed on her back. When she finally crossed the service door and the wood closed behind her, she leaned against the hallway wall and let out the air she had been holding. Her knees trembled. Doña Remedios hugged her before she could say a word. My girl, my beautiful girl, the cook murmured, rocking her like a daughter. Why did you never tell us why you carried that burden alone all this time? Because when I say it out loud, it hurts again, Doña Reme, Renata replied. And finally, away from their eyes, she allowed herself to cry. Playing is like opening a tomb, my fathers. I buried Renata Salazar 8 years ago, and today that man with his stupid bet unearthed her in front of the whole world. Well, maybe, Doña Remedios said, drying her tears with her thumb. It was time she came out to breathe. The dead don't rest buried by force, my daughter, nor do the living. You don't understand, Doña Reme. Renata sat on the wooden bench in the kitchen and covered her face with her hands. When I stopped playing, it wasn't just because of the accident. It was because every time I picked up the violin, I felt my father looking at me with disappointment. He gave everything for me. He sold his workshop, pawned his watch, worked double shifts to pay for my lessons. He said I would reach the grand theaters of the world. And when he died, instead of fulfilling his dream, I hid. I became this. She gestured to her apron, her little room, her entire life. Every note I played today was like saying, Forgive me, Papa. Forgive me for giving up. Doña Remedios sat beside her and took her reddened hands in hers. Listen to me, child. I buried a husband and a son. I know what it's like to carry dead weight, and I'm going to tell you a truth that took me years to understand. We don't honor those who leave by hiding. We honor them by living. Your father didn't sell his watch for you to scrub floors in fear. He sold it so the world could hear you. And today, the world finally heard you. She squeezed her hands. Don't throw that away because of fear. Renata didn't reply, but something in those words lodged itself within her like a seed. Tomas appeared with a glass of water and a cookie, not quite knowing what to do. As always, Renata, it was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, he said, moved. I swear my jaw dropped. Well, and a tear. Well, several. Renata laughed through her tears. Those three, the cook, the clumsy butler, she, were a family assembled from the remnants life had left behind. And for a moment in the warm kitchen that smelled of cinnamon, she felt safe. But in the salon, the serpent was sharpening its fangs. Jimena Castellano had retreated to a corner by the curtains, pretending to drink champagne, while inside, blood boiled. She had seen Maximiliano's face. She had seen how he looked at the maid. She knew that expression. It was that of a man ensnared by something he couldn't buy. And she understood, with the cold lucidity of hatred, that maid with green eyes had become, in a single night, the greatest threat to her plan to become Mrs. Andrade. Enjoy your moment, girl, she murmured to herself, her fingers tightening on the glass until her knuckles turned white. Enjoy it well, because I will personally ensure it's your last. Beside her, A thin man materialized, with an oily smile. Rodrigo, her cousin and lifelong accomplice, a scrupulous lawyer who could smell a dirty deal from miles away. "I see you're sharp, cousin," he said in a low voice. "What's brewing in that little head?" "I need you to find out everything about that maid," Jimena whispered, her smile never leaving her as she glanced towards the salon. "Where did she come from? What's she hiding?" "Everyone has a skeleton in their closet, Rodrigo. And when a woman tries so hard to be invisible, it's because her skeleton is colossal. She took a sip of champagne. Find her for me. And when we have her, I'm going to destroy her with such relish that she'll wish she'd never touched that damned violin in her life." Rodrigo smiled and disappeared into the throng of guests. Meanwhile, at the other end of the salon, Maximiliano Andrade gazed at the violin abandoned on the piano. He picked it up, held it just as she had, awkwardly, without understanding, and for an instant, he imagined the melody again, and with it, his mother's voice. Something had changed within him that night, and he couldn't yet put a name to it. Don Augusto Belmonte, the old patron with white hair, approached with a slow step and a bright gaze. "Maximiliano," the elder said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Listen to me carefully, because I've listened to music my entire life, and I know what I'm talking about. That girl is no amateur. That girl played tonight with a pain that isn't taught in any conservatory. I've heard that sound before, years ago. I don't remember where, but I can assure you of one thing." He squeezed the young man's shoulder. "Your maid has a name? A name that was once on the marquise? If I were you, I wouldn't rest until I found out what it is." Maximiliano looked towards the service entrance where Renata had disappeared. "I won't rest," he murmured. "I assure you." That night, when the last guest departed and the mansion fell silent, Maximiliano couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in the enormous bed of his suite, Don Augusto's words echoing in his head, and beneath them, even more insistently, the echo of that melody. He got up and walked barefoot through the dark corridors of the house he had never felt was his. Without realizing it, his feet led him to the grand, empty salon, where his grandmother's violin had returned to its illuminated display case. He stood looking at it for a long time. 30 years that instrument had been silent. 30 years since he, as a child, had forbidden anyone from playing it again, because the sound of the violin reminded him too much of his mother. And the memory was unbearable. And that night, a maid had made it sing, and instead of killing him with pain, it had made him feel alive for the first time in a long time. "Who are you?" he asked the empty salon. "The woman who wasn't there. Who the hell are you?" At the other end of the mansion, in the cold little room next to the pantry, Renata Salazar wasn't sleeping either. Lying on her narrow bed, she stared at the ceiling, moving her fingers slowly in the air, recalling a fingering she thought she had forgotten. For the first time in 8 years, she felt no pain doing it. She felt the urge to play again. And so, that night, without any of the three fully knowing it, the three forces that would clash in the following weeks were set in motion. A man fascinated, determined to uncover the truth. A wounded woman, determined to hide it. And a serpent, determined to use it as venom. The buried past. The next morning, Tomas found Renata scrubbing the same marble floor as always, as if nothing had happened, as if the previous night hadn't brought 200 people to tears. "The master is waiting for you in his study," the boy said nervously. "And Renata, be careful. This morning, Doña Jimena's cousin arrived, that Rodrigo, the one with the weasel face. They're whispering in corners. It doesn't sit well with me." Renata dried her hands on her apron and went up. Maximiliano Andrade's study was a room with high ceilings, lined with books no one read, with a mahogany desk larger than her bed. He stood by the window, his back to her, looking at the gardens. When she entered, he turned, and for a moment neither of them knew what to say. The arrogant man from the previous night seemed different in the morning light. Younger, more tired, more human. "Sit down, please," he said, indicating a chair. "I prefer to stand, sir. I won't be long before I return to work." "You're not going to be scrubbing floors anymore," he said. And seeing her open her mouth to protest, he raised a hand. "Not as punishment." "Quite the opposite, Renata. What you did last night. I haven't slept all night because of you." He walked towards her. "I need to understand. Who are you, really? And don't just tell me you're the maid, because we both know that's a lie." Renata lowered her gaze. For 8 years, she had guarded that secret, like one guards a burning ember in their fist, enduring the burn, so that no one would see the light. But something in the man's voice, which was no longer commanding but asking, loosened the knot in her throat. "My name is Renata Salazar," she finally said, and saying her full surname after so long was like removing a bandage from a wound that hadn't healed. "And 8 years ago, my name was on theater marquees." And then, for the first time since she had buried her previous life, Renata spoke. She spoke of her father, Esteban Salazar, a humble luthier who built and repaired violins in a tiny workshop that smelled of wood and varnish. A man with large hands and a gentle voice, who, upon discovering that his 5-year-old daughter could repeat any melody by ear, sold his pocket watch, the only valuable thing he owned, to pay for her first lesson. She spoke of the nights her father worked double shifts repairing other people's instruments to pay for the best teachers, how at 7 she was already playing entire concertos from memory, how at 12 she debuted, how critics began calling her the miracle of the strings. "My dad didn't want fame for himself," Renata said, her voice breaking. "He wanted the world to hear me. He used to say that music was the only language that crossed over, that reached those who were no longer here. He built a violin for me with his own hands over 2 years, every night after the workshop. It was the most beautiful object I had ever touched, and he gave it to me on my 18th birthday." She paused, and a fragile smile crossed her face, the memory of a happiness that seemed from another life. "We used to play together on Sundays," she continued. "He repaired violins all week, but on Sundays, he would take out an old one he kept for himself and accompany me. He wasn't a great musician. My dad played with more heart than technique, but those Sundays in that workshop that smelled of varnish were the happiest of my life. I played in the most important halls in the country. I met governors, ambassadors, people who paid fortunes for a seat, and nothing compared to playing for my dad on any given Sunday, with the old strings and the coffee growing cold on the workbench. People think the miracle was in my hands. The miracle was in him, who believed in me when we didn't even have food." "What happened?" Maximiliano asked in a low voice. Renata closed her eyes. "We were on our way to my most important performance. My debut as a soloist with the National Orchestra, the dream of my entire life and my dad's. It was raining. A truck ran a red light. Her voice became a mere thread. My dad died at the scene. I survived, but with my right hand shattered. 3 surgeries, months of therapy. The doctors said I would play again with time, and physically, I did. But every time I picked up the bow, I saw the headlights of that truck. I heard my dad scream. Music, which had been my refuge, became my torture." She paused. Maximiliano didn't move. "I was left alone and deeply in debt. Hospitals don't forgive. And one day, 2 tears escaped. One day, I had to sell the violin my dad had built for me. The only thing I had left of him, made with his own hands. I sold it to pay debts. That day, Renata Salazar died. I kept the clippings in a box. I moved to another city. I invented a life without a past, and I became what you see, a nameless maid. Because a maid doesn't have to remember. A maid only has to serve." The study fell silent. Maximiliano Andrade, the man who had bought everything in life, discovered that there was a kind of loss that money couldn't even begin to comprehend. "I lost my parents too," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "A plane crash. I was 18. My mother played the violin. I used to fall asleep to that sound as a child. When she died, I forbade even a single note from being played in this house again. I locked my grandmother's in that display case and swore never to hear it again." He looked at her. "Until last night? Last night, when you played, for a moment I heard my mother again. That's why I couldn't sleep. You gave me back something I had buried as deeply as you buried yours." They looked at each other. For the first time, they weren't the master and the maid, the rich and the poor. They were 2 people carrying the same dead weight on their backs. "Play for me," he said suddenly. "Now. Here, just for me, with no audience, no stakes, no mockery, please." Renata hesitated, but something in her chest, that seed Doña Remedios had planted, pushed towards the light. Maximiliano went to the salon, brought the Countess's violin, and handed it to her, this time without a hint of arrogance, almost with reverence. She took it, tuned it carefully, and played. It wasn't a sad piece this time. It was a simple, luminous melody that her father used to hum to her as a child before sleep. And as she played, Maximiliano watched her with an expression that none of his guests from the previous night would have recognized, that of a man for whom something was thawing inside, slowly, painfully, like a river at the end of winter. Halfway through the melody, without realizing it, A tear escaped Maximiliano. He, who hadn't cried even at his parents' funeral, who had turned pain into ice and ice into arrogance, felt the music open a door that had been sealed for 18 years. He quickly wiped it with the back of his hand, embarrassed, hoping she hadn't seen. But Renata saw it, and for the first time, she felt no fear of that man, nor resentment. She felt tenderness. When she finished, neither spoke for a long while. The silence of the study was no longer awkward. It was the silence of two people who had recognized each other. "Stay," he said finally, "not as a maid. I want to help you return to music. I have contacts, venues, a foundation. Could you go back to the stage?" "Renata, a gift like yours cannot be spent your life hidden under an apron." "No," she replied softly, but with firmness. "I appreciate what you offer, Mr. Andrade, but I cannot return to that world. That world took everything from me. Let me continue to be invisible. It's the only thing I know how to do without pain." And she left, leaving the richest man in the city with a violin in his hands and a new question in his chest. What neither of them knew was that at that very moment, 2 floors below, Rodrigo was spreading a pile of yellowed newspaper clippings over the library table, clippings he had obtained that morning from the city's newspaper archive. "Look at this, Prima," he said with a weasel-like smile. "Your dear maid has a name and a surname, Renata Salazar. The miracle of the strings. There was an accident. Father dead. Debts. A hospital scandal that sued her. The child. Prodigy disappeared from the map 8 years ago. He tapped the clippings with his finger. She has an entire past she's hiding. And people who hide their past always carry shame." Jimena took the clippings and scanned them with eyes that shone with hatred. "Perfect," she murmured. "A professional liar entered this house under a false name. And what if she came for something else? What if she came to steal?" She smiled slowly. "Rodrigo, dear cousin, I think I know exactly how I'm going to get rid of the little violinist, and it's going to be in front of everyone, again." But this time no one was going to applaud her. The trap. Over the next 2 weeks, something shifted in the Andrade mansion, and everyone noticed it except for the two protagonists. Maximiliano found excuses to cross paths with Renata. He'd ask her to bring him coffee in his study, even though he had a buzzer to summon any servant. He'd descend to the kitchen through an absurd pretext and linger longer than necessary, listening to Doña Remedios spin tales while casting sidelong glances at the girl with green eyes. Renata, for her part, was no longer entirely invisible. She smiled more. One afternoon, Tomas swore he heard her humming while she was hanging sheets. "Something's happening here," Doña Remedios told Tomas, beating eggs with suspicious vigor. "And it smells like a wedding to me, I tell you. I know more about love than recipes." The master and Renata. Tomas opened his mouth. "But he's a millionaire, and she's... Well, the heart doesn't count money, my boy. Hush now and beat." One of those afternoons, Maximiliano found Renata in the mansion's old music room, a chamber that had been sealed for years, filled with dust and white covers draped over the furniture. She had entered without permission, drawn by an old upright piano tucked away under a sheet. When he opened the door, he found her running her fingers over the yellowed keys with a dreamy expression. "Excuse me," she startled. "I shouldn't be here. I'm leaving." "Stay," he said, pulling the sheet off an armchair and sitting down. "This room belonged to my mother. I haven't been in here for 18 years. He looked around. The covered instruments, the empty music stands. "This is where she used to play. I'd sit right there in that corner and do my homework while she practiced." He swallowed. "I had it locked the day of her funeral." Renata looked at him with a tenderness she dared not name. "Why are you opening it now?" "I don't know," he lied. But they both knew why he was opening it. For her. Because ever since that maid had made his grandmother's violin sing, doors that Maximiliano had kept shut for years were beginning to open, one by one. "Play me something," he asked. "Here, where my mother used to play." And Renata played. And for an hour, in that resurrected music room, the rich man and the poor woman ceased to exist, and only two orphans remained, sharing the only language that crossed divides. But not everyone in the house viewed this budding affection with favor. Jimena Castellanos watched everything from the shadows, and every smile exchanged between Maximiliano and the maid was a stab to her heart. She had spent months investing in that man. Patience, flattery, dinners, intrigues. And now she saw a nobody with a false name effortlessly snatching her prize. "Enough waiting," she told Rodrigo one night in the library, the curtains drawn. Tonight is the dinner with the partners and the family. All the important people will be here. It's the perfect moment. She took a velvet case from her purse and opened it. Inside, nestled on silk, gleamed a necklace of emeralds and diamonds worth a fortune. The Countess of Andrade's necklace, the most prized jewel of this family. Maximiliano keeps it in the safe in the drawing room. I got the combination months ago, just in case. You never know. What are you going to do? Rodrigo asked, though he already suspected. I'm going to hide it in the maid's room, Jimena said with chilling calmness. And then, during dinner, I'll discover that the necklace is missing. I'll ask that they search all the staff. And guess whose room it will turn up in? She smiled. A thief with a false name. Maximiliano won't be able to defend her in front of his partners without looking like a fool. He'll throw her out that very night, and I'll be there to console him. You're terrible, cousin, Rodrigo said with admiration. I'm practical. That same afternoon, while Renata was helping in the kitchen with the dinner preparations, Jimena ascended silently to the small room next to the pantry. She opened Renata's old wardrobe. She rummaged through the humble clothes and, at the bottom beneath a cardboard box, she hid the case with the necklace. Before leaving, her gaze fell upon the box. She opened it. Inside were yellowed newspaper clippings, the miracle of the strings, and on top, a photograph. A girl about 10 years old, hugging a man with large hands and a gentle smile, both holding a violin. On the back, in childish handwriting, Papa and I forever. Jimena looked at the photo for a second. Something deep within, far away, unsettled her, but hate was stronger than any flicker of conscience. She tossed the photo back into the box and left. The dinner began at 9. The long dining table brought together Maximiliano's partners, some relatives, and, of course, Jimena, radiant in a red dress, seated strategically to the host's right. Renata and Tomas served the dishes. Every time Renata approached Maximiliano, he'd brush her hand as he took the plate, a minimal, secret gesture that made her heart race. The conversation revolved around dizzying figures and business dealings, but Jimena, beside Maximiliano, barely listened. She watched every glance he directed at the maid, every time his voice softened when speaking to her. And with each of those gestures, her plan became more urgent, more necessary, more just. For that is how the cruel call their cruelty justice. One of the partners, a portly man adorned with gold rings, raised his glass to Maximiliano. To the most coveted bachelor in the country, he toasted. When's the wedding, boy? This house needs a lady. Laughter filled the air as eyes shifted towards Jimena, who smiled with false modesty. But Maximiliano's eyes, despite himself, sought Renata for an instant, who at that moment was pouring wine at the other end of the table. It was only a tenth of a second, but Jimena saw it. She saw it all and decided it was time. At dessert, she dramatically clutched her throat. My necklace, she exclaimed. The necklace. Maximiliano, this afternoon you asked me to admire your grandmother's necklace, and we left it on the sideboard. It's gone. It's disappeared. An awkward silence fell. Maximiliano frowned. That's impossible. I keep that necklace in the safe. Well, it's not there, dear. We saw it together 2 hours ago. Jimena scanned the table, feigning distress. Good heavens, how embarrassing. With all your partners present. Maximiliano, I don't want to accuse anyone, but only the staff has been in and out of these rooms this afternoon. For the honor of your family, you should have the servants' quarters searched. If there's nothing to hide, no one should be offended. I'm not going to search my people like criminals, Maximiliano said firmly. Oh no? Jimena raised an eyebrow, her voice turning to ice. And why are you afraid of what you'll find? Because I've found out something curious, Maximiliano. That maid of yours, the one you defend so much, doesn't even go by the name she claims. Her real name is Renata Salazar. She came to this house with a false identity, a woman who lies about who she is. What else might she be capable of hiding? The partners murmured. Renata, standing by the sideboard with a tray in her hands, felt the world crumble. The tray trembled. Maximiliano looked at her for a fraction of a second, a flicker of doubt crossing his eyes, and that doubt was the worst betrayal of all. Search the rooms, Jimena ordered, addressing the security guards with the authority of someone who already felt like the lady of the house. Start with the one belonging to the green-eyed maid. No, Doña Remedios cried out from the kitchen doorway. Renata wouldn't steal a hairpin. I vouch for her. You shut your mouth, old woman, or you're going too, Jimena spat. They went up to the small room, and a minute later, one of the guards descended with the velvet case in his hands. He opened it in front of the entire table, and the Countess of Andrade's emerald necklace glittered under the chandelier's light like irrefutable proof. A choked gasp swept through the dining room. Renata turned white. The tray slipped from her hands and crashed onto the marble floor with a clatter of silver and broken crystal. She shook her head, backing away until she hit the wall. I didn't. I never. That's not mine. I would never. Her voice wouldn't come out. Mr. Andrade, please. I would never take anything from you. I swear it on my father's memory. It's a trap! Doña Remedios shouted, pushing her way through the guests, her face flushed. I know this girl. She sleeps in a room without heating and has never asked for anything. And she's going to steal a necklace to hide it under her own clothes where anyone would find it. That's not what a thief does. That's someone who wants to be found. Ask yourselves who benefits. For a moment, the old cook's logic hung in the air of the dining room. Some partners shifted uncomfortably. It's true, Tomas dared to say from the doorway. Renata is the most honest person in this house, more honest than many sitting at this table. Silence, insolent servants! Jimena roared, losing her composure for a moment. Who gave you permission to speak? One more word and you're all out on the street. She recomposed herself, smoothing her red dress, and turned back to Maximiliano with a venomous smile. See what you've raised, dear. A band of servants covering for each other. The evidence is on the table. Your grandmother's necklace hidden in the room of a woman who came here under a false name. What more do you need? Renata looked at Maximiliano, and in her green eyes was a plea so naked, so pure, it would have moved anyone. Believe me, those eyes said. You know me. You heard my music. You saw who I truly am. Please, believe me. But Jimena had already won. She crossed her arms triumphantly and delivered the line she had been sharpening for 2 weeks. A thief, a liar, and a fraud. That's your dear violinist Maximiliano. I told you the first night. Now decide. Do you throw her out, or do we call the police in front of all your partners? All eyes were fixed on Maximiliano Andrade, and he, with his grandmother's necklace glittering like an accusation, and Renata's green eyes silently begging him to believe her, opened his mouth to speak. At the bottom of the well, Maximiliano Andrade had the truth before his eyes, and yet he hesitated. It was only an instant, but that instant would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had his grandmother's necklace glinting on the table, the faces of his partners waiting for his reaction, Jimena's poisoned voice demanding a decision, and Renata against the white wall, trembling, swearing on her father's memory that she was innocent. And for a second, one damned second, the poison of doubt crept in. What if it's true? What if she deceived me? She came with a false name. She hid who she was. What do I really know about this woman, Renata? He finally said, in a voice he didn't recognize as his own. Why did you lie to me about your name? The question fell like a tombstone. Renata looked at him, and something in her green eyes extinguished. It wasn't the question of a man who trusted. It was the question of a judge. I told you the truth yesterday, she replied softly. I opened my heart to you. I told you about my father, about the violin, everything. And now you ask me this. A tear rolled down her cheek. Then you heard none of what I played for you. Don't play the victim, Jimena jumped in. The evidence is here. Maximiliano, please, don't be weak in front of your partners. A thief is a thief. Throw her out. Maximiliano ran a hand over his face. He was cornered by pride, by the partners, by doubt, by the ruthless woman whispering in his ear. And he made the worst decision of his life, the decision of cowards who believe themselves prudent. I'm not calling the police, he said, not looking at Renata. But I can't have someone under suspicion in my house either. Gather your things. Leave tonight. Once this all blows over. We'll see, Renata repeated, her voice not trembling for the first time. She straightened up. Something within her, mortally wounded, found a final dignity. No, Mr. Andrade. There will be no such thing. We'll see. I gave you the only thing of value I had left, the truth. And you, as soon as it suited you to doubt, you doubted. She slowly removed her apron and folded it neatly on a chair. I'm leaving, but not because I'm guilty. I'm leaving because I no longer wish to be where I am not believed. May your necklace offer you more companionship than I ever could. And with her head held high amidst 50 gazes, Renata Salazar walked towards the service door without looking back even once. Doña Remedios caught up with her in the hallway, heartbroken. My daughter, no, don't leave like this. We'll fix it. I'll speak with the master. There's nothing to discuss, Doña Reme. Renata hugged her tightly, holding back tears. Thank you for everything, for being the mother I lost. Take care of yourself and take care of Tomas. He's a good boy. But where are you going to go? It's raining, child, and you don't have a single peso. Stay at my place, with my sister, whatever you need. I don't want to get you into trouble with the mistress. Renata shook her head. You've already done more for me than anyone just by believing me. You don't know what that's worth, Doña Reme. In this house, you were the only one who didn't doubt. The cook held her hands desperately. Because I know you. Because I saw you cry in secret and you never asked for anything. Because a mother knows that doubt of the master's, it's not your fault, my child. It's his. His heart is so accustomed to the cold, it doesn't recognize warmth even when it's right in front of him. Renata smiled through tears and kissed her wrinkled forehead. Take good care of yourself. And she gently pulled away. She went up to her small room one last time, packed her 4 humble garments into a cloth bag, and with infinite care, picked up the cardboard box filled with newspaper clippings and the photograph. Dad and I, forever. She pressed it against her chest and left the Andrade mansion through the servant's door, the same one she had entered 2 years earlier with the hope of disappearing. That night it rained. It rained like the night of the accident, as if the sky were determined to replay the worst scenes of Renata's life for her. She walked under the downpour through the streets of the wealthy neighborhood with her bag and her box, until the mansions gave way to more modest buildings, and then to streets she didn't know. She had nowhere to go. She had spent her savings paying off the last of the hospital debt months ago. She took refuge under the awning of a closed bakery and sank onto the step, soaked, clutching the cardboard box to protect it from the rain, as if protecting that box were protecting the last remnant of herself. She opened the box. The photograph had gotten a little wet in one corner. She dried it with her sleeve. Forgive me, Dad, she whispered to the image of the man with large hands. You were right. Music was the only language that crossed to the other side. And look what it brought me back to this. Humiliation again. I should have stayed invisible. I should have never played. But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Because for 2 weeks in that house, she had felt alive again. She had played for someone who was listening. And though it hurt now like an open wound, she couldn't regret having breathed again. She ran her fingers over the photograph, over her father's smiling face, and remembered the last thing he had told her the morning of the accident as they got into the car. Whatever happens, my daughter, never let fear play for you. Fear is out of tune. That phrase had accompanied her for years like a reproach. That night, she finally understood it differently. She had played again. She had stopped being afraid for 2 whole weeks, and that, no matter what happened, no one could take away from her. I don't regret it, she told the photo, her voice firm despite the cold. Do you hear me, Dad? I don't regret playing, even if it costs me everything. I was myself again for a while, and I'll find a way to do it again. I promise you. The rain intensified. An elderly woman closing her balcony shutters across the street saw her there, soaked, and shouted for her to take shelter in the building's entryway, that it wasn't good to spend the night in the open. Small gestures, from humble people to humble people. Renata thanked her with a wave and snuggled into the dry entryway. She stayed there, clutching the box, until the cold and exhaustion overcame her. Meanwhile, at the mansion, the disaster party had dissolved. The partners left, murmuring. Jimena, triumphant, tried to console Maximiliano with caresses and sweet words, but he pushed her away brusquely. Leave me alone, he said. But darling, I did the right thing. That woman, I said, leave me alone, Jimena. When she finally withdrew, Maximiliano remained in the empty dining room with his grandmother's necklace in his hand. And then, in the silence, Renata's words began to echo in his mind. As soon as it suited you to doubt, you doubted. He thought of the music room. He thought of the tear he had shed listening to her. He thought of her green eyes, begging him to believe her, and a cold void opened in his stomach. What have I done? He murmured. He went up to the music room, the one he had reopened for her, and sat in the corner where he used to do his homework as a child while his mother rehearsed. The piano was still uncovered. The simple melody Renata had played for him, the lullaby his father used to hum, seemed to still float in the air. And Maximiliano, the man who had everything, realized he had just thrown out into the rain the only person who, in years, had given him something akin to happiness. Not because of the evidence, but because of fear, because of pride in front of partners who didn't even matter to him. Renata's words burned him. As soon as it suited you to doubt, you doubted. I'm a coward, he said aloud to the empty room. Mom, I'm a coward. In the kitchen, Doña Remedios wasn't crying. She was furious, and a mother's fury is worth more than 1,000 detectives. She had Tomas in front of her, gripping his shoulders. Listen to me carefully, boy. That girl didn't steal anything. I know it in my bones. Someone put that necklace in her room, and there's only one person in this house with a heart dark enough to do it. Doña Jimena, Tomas said, swallowing. But how do we prove it? It's a cook's word against a rich lady's. Doña Remedios became very still. An idea flashed in her eyes. Tomas, she said slowly. Your cousin? The one who works the night shift at the security booth? Didn't you tell me once that Mr. Andrade had new cameras installed last year? The kind that record everything. Tomas's eyes widened. The cameras. There's one in the servants' quarters hallway, Doña Reme. If Jimena went up to put the necklace, the camera must have recorded her. Well then, said the cook, taking off her apron decisively, you're going to find your cousin right now, in the middle of the rain. I don't care. And you're going to get that recording before that viper thinks of deleting it. Did you hear me? For Renata, run. And Tomas, the clumsy butler who had never done anything heroic in his life, ran out into the rain with his heart pounding a mile a minute, ready for the first time to be brave. Far away, under a bakery awning, Renata slept, clutching her father's photograph, unaware that at that very moment, two Azar humble people who loved her were about to change everything. The truth explodes at 6 in the morning, drenched to the bone. Tomas was banging on the door of Maximiliano Andrade's office with an envelope in his hand, his heart about to leap out of his chest. Sir, forgive the hour, but you have to see this. It's urgent. It's about Renata. Maximiliano, who hadn't slept, opened it immediately. His eyes were red, and his tie was undone. Did you find her? Where is she? No, sir, but... Tomas swallowed. My cousin works in security. The house cameras record everything. And last night, before you came down for dinner, look what the camera in the servants' hallway recorded. He handed her a tablet. Maximiliano took it with trembling hands and watched. Tomas had spent the entire night in the rain. First, he ran 3 kilometers to his cousin's house. He woke him by banging on the window. He begged him, pleaded with him. The cousin, terrified of losing his job, refused at first. If the master finds out I took the recordings without permission, I'll be fired. But Tomas didn't give up. And if it were your sister sleeping in the street, accused of something she didn't do, would you still say no? That question won over the cousin. Together, they went back to the booth, downloaded the videos before anyone could delete them. And Tomas waited, soaked and shivering, for 6 o'clock to dare to knock on the master's door. He saw Jimena Castellanos in her red dress ascend the service stairs, looking in both directions. He saw her enter Renata's small room. He saw her leave 3 minutes later, smoothing her dress, with the expression of someone who had just done something dirty and was satisfied. The timestamp in the corner of the screen, 8:47 p.m., almost an hour before he discovered the necklace was missing, Maximiliano stared at the screen as white as a sheet. The doubt that had poisoned him the night before churned in his stomach, now transformed into something worse, shame and rage. Rage at himself, especially because Renata had opened her heart to him, had confided the deepest pain of her life, and he, at the first hint of suspicion, had treated her like a criminal. A servant boy, soaked to the bone, had had more courage and more faith in one night than he had in 2 weeks. There's more, sir, Tomas said, handing him another video. The living room camera. This is from 2 weeks ago. In the second recording, Jimena was seen opening Maximiliano's safe, the one with the necklace, with complete calm, jotting something down on her phone and closing it again. She knew the combination. The combination to my safe, Maximiliano murmured. I changed it last month. I only gave it to her. His blood ran cold. I gave it to Jimena because she asked me to keep her jewelry. I trusted her. Doña Remedios appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, with the dignity of a judge. Do you believe me now, sir? Or do you still need to doubt a little longer? Maximiliano looked at her, and for the first time in his life, the owner of the mansion, Andrade, lowered his head before his cook. You were right, Doña Remedios, from the very beginning. And I threw her out. I threw her out into the rain. His voice cracked. What kind of man am I? One who still has time to fix it? The cook replied, her tone unwavering. But first, my girl's name must be cleared in front of everyone who saw her humiliated. Half measures won't do. She was accused in public. She must be acquitted in public. Maximiliano raised his head, and in his eyes, something that had been extinguished for years reappeared. True determination, the kind of a man who finally knows what is right. Convene everyone, he said. The same partners from last night, the relatives and Jimena. especially Jimena. Let no one be absent today. That same afternoon, the grand ballroom was filled again. The same faces from the night of the disaster, this time confused, not knowing why the host had summoned them with such urgency. Jimena arrived on her cousin Rodrigo's arms, smiling, convinced that Maximiliano had finally gotten rid of the maid and had called her for something much more pleasant. She was even thinking of a wedding dress. "Darling," she purred as she entered. "How mysterious. Why have you gathered us?" Maximiliano stood before the fireplace, serene, a tablet in his hand. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Last night, in this very house, an injustice was committed. I accused an innocent woman of theft in front of you all and threw her out of my house. Today, I have gathered you to rectify that mistake with the same publicity with which I made it." Jimena paled slightly but kept her smile. "Darling, don't torture yourself. You did the right thing. The evidence! The evidence!" Maximiliano cut it. "It was planted." She held up the tablet. "This camera that records the service corridor says so. Gentlemen, observe." She played the video on the grand screen in the hall. And there, before 50 witnesses, Jimena Castellanos appeared in her red dress, sneaking into Renata's room at 8:47 p.m. and leaving 3 minutes later. Then the second video. Jimena opening the safe. A murmur of scandal swept through the hall like a wave. The lady who had mocked Renata on the first night covered her mouth. The partner of the gold rings, who had pressured Maximiliano so much for a wedding, shook his head in disdain. The same society, which 2 weeks earlier had laughed at the maid and the night before had silently condemned her, now regarded the true culprit with a mixture of horror and morbid satisfaction. That's a setup," Jimena shrieked, backing away. "It's fake! That maid bribed him! Rodrigo, say something! Tell them it's a lie." But Rodrigo, the lawyer with the oily smile, saw the ship sinking and, like any rat, decided to jump first. He took a step back, separating himself from his cousin. "I have nothing to do with this," he said loudly, sweating. She asked me to investigate the girl. I didn't know she was going to plant the necklace. I swear. It was Jimena's idea. It was all Jimena's idea. She forced me." "Traitor, coward!" Jimena screamed, turning towards him like a wild beast. "You got me the clippings! You said everyone has a skeleton in their closet." And in saying that, in front of everyone, he had just confessed. The hall erupted in indignant murmurs. The partners who had looked at her with admiration the night before now looked at her with disgust. Don Augusto Belmonte, the old white-haired patron, who had also been summoned, stood up, leaning on his cane. "Madam," he said, in a grave and solemn voice, "you not only tried to destroy an innocent woman, you tried to destroy one of the most extraordinary violinists this country has ever produced. Because last night, I couldn't sleep remembering that sound, and I finally realized who that girl was. She is Renata Salazar, the miracle of the strings. I heard her play 9 years ago at the National Theater. I cried then, as I cried last night. We thought we had lost her forever after her father's tragedy, and it turns out she was here scrubbing floors, humiliated by people who aren't even worthy of her shoelaces." A reverent silence fell over the hall. Maximiliano felt his chest fill with pride and remorse in equal measure. "Jimena Castellanos," he said then, his voice like ice, "get out of my house now! My lawyers will contact you, and believe me, after this, neither you nor your cousin will ever set foot in this city's society again. Slander, simulated theft, and trespassing are crimes. You will pay for it all. Maximiliano, please." Jimena instantly changed tactics, throwing herself at him with fake tears. "I did it for love, for jealousy. I couldn't stand seeing you with her. She," he interrupted, "is the woman with whom I will spend the rest of my life, if she still wants to look me in the face after what I did to her. And you were never capable of loving anyone but yourself." "Guards." 2 security men approached. Jimena, finally understanding that she had lost the man, the money, the position, everything, let out a cry of pure rage, cast one last hateful glance around, and stormed out of the hall, with Rodrigo sneaking out behind her amidst the contemptuous murmurs of the crowd. When the door closed, Doña Remedios approached Maximiliano. "You've cleared her name, sir. Well done." But a name doesn't embrace anyone on a rainy night. She looked at him intently. "My girl is out there, alone, believing that the whole world betrayed her, including you. What do you plan to do about it?" Maximiliano was already putting on his coat. "Find her," he said, "even if I have to search every street in this city. Doña Remedios, Tomas, help me find her." And there's something else I have to do first. Something I owe her from the day she told me her story. What is it, sir? Asked Tomas. Maximiliano smiled for the first time in hours, a smile with a plan behind it. I'm going to get back what she should never have lost. The promise fulfilled. Renata Salazar woke up at dawn in the entryway of an unfamiliar building, her body stiff, her clothes still damp, clutching the cardboard box to her chest. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came back. The accusation, the necklace, the doubt in Maximiliano's eyes, the service door, the rain. She sat up slowly. She had no money, no job, no home, but she had her father's photograph and a promise she had made to herself under the downpour, to be herself again, no matter the cost. She decided to go to the only place in the world that still belonged to her a little, the old neighborhood where her father had had his workshop. She walked for an hour until she reached the narrow alley that smelled of bread and motor oil. The workshop was still there, now converted into a small instrument repair shop, run by Don Ernesto, an old friend of her father's, who recognized her as soon as she walked in. Renata, is that you, my child? The old man came out from behind the counter, his eyes watery. Good heavens, it's been years, years. Look at you, you're soaked. What happened to you? And Renata, in that workshop that smelled of her childhood, finally allowed herself to cry all she hadn't cried on the street. Meanwhile, Maximiliano Andrade hadn't wasted any time. Even before leaving to find her, he had made 2 calls. The first, to his lawyers to bring the full weight of the law down on Jimena and Rodrigo. The second, to a private investigator with a single mission, to track down the violin Esteban Salazar had hand-built for his daughter, the one Renata had been forced to sell 8 years earlier to pay hospital debts. It wasn't easy. The instrument had passed through 3 owners. The last was a collector in the capital who kept it in a display case, never touching it, like a trophy. Maximiliano called him that same morning and offered him an absurd, scandalous sum, triple its value. The collector, tempted, haggled. Maximiliano doubled the offer without batting an eye. It's just a violin, the collector said, not understanding. To you, Maximiliano replied. To the woman I'm going to give it back to, it's her father. That same afternoon, Esteban Salazar's violin was traveling back in the passenger seat of Maximiliano Andrade's car. Finding her wasn't difficult either. Doña Remedios remembered that Renata had once told her about her father's workshop in the old southern neighborhood. Maximiliano drove there, his heart pounding in his chest as it hadn't since he was a child, the violin case in the back seat, and a prepared speech that he completely forgot the moment he saw her. Because he saw her. Through the glass of Don Ernesto's shop, sitting on a stool with a cup of coffee in her hands and her hair still damp, talking to the old man, alive, whole, more beautiful in her sadness than all the perfumed women in all the salons in the world. Maximiliano pushed the door open. The bell chimed. Renata looked up, and at the sight of him, her face hardened. She stood up. What are you doing here? She asked, with a coldness she struggled to feign. I came to ask for your forgiveness. Save it. You doubted me when I needed someone to believe me most. That's not fixed with words. I know, Maximiliano said, stopping at a respectful distance. I didn't come to ask you to forgive me. That would be asking too much, and I don't deserve it. I came to tell you 3 things. First, everyone knows the truth now. Jimena planted the necklace. A camera recorded her. She confessed in front of everyone who humiliated you. Your name is clear, Renata. More than clear, Don Augusto Belmonte recognized you. The whole city now knows that the Andrade's maid was the miracle of the strings. Renata swallowed, moved despite herself, but said nothing. The second thing, he continued, lowering his voice. You are absolutely right. I doubted. At the moment when it mattered most, I was a coward. I let myself be swayed by pride, by the fear of looking bad in front of people who are worthless. And I failed you. I will carry that shame for the rest of my life, whether your forgiveness is deserved or not. I just needed you to hear it from my mouth. And the third? Asked Renata, her voice less steady than she intended. Maximiliano stepped out to the car for a moment and returned with a case. He placed it slowly on the counter and opened it. Renata looked inside, and the world stopped. It was him, the violin, her violin, the one her father had built with his own hands night after night for 2 years, the one he had given her for her 18th birthday, the one she had had to sell the day Renata Salazar died. She recognized every grain of the wood, the small mark near the bridge, the varnish her father had mixed himself. She recognized it as one recognizes a beloved face. No, it's not possible, she whispered, her hands trembling over her mouth. I sold it. I lost it forever. How did you find it? Maximiliano asked simply. Since you told me your story, I knew that someday I had to give it back to you. It's not a gift. You owe me nothing for it. Just be yourself again. That's all I ask of you. The world deserves to hear you again. And your father, too. Renata took the violin with infinite reverence. She rested it on her chin, in the exact spot where she had rested it so many times, and drew the bow across the strings. The sound that emerged, warm, deep, familiar, broke her heart and mended it at the same time. Don Ernesto, behind the counter, wept silently. It was as if Esteban Salazar had walked back into his workshop. Is there one more thing? Maximiliano asked, and for the first time his voice trembled. The first night, in front of all my guests, I said a cruel thing to you. I said, if you play this violin, I'll marry you right here. I said it to humiliate you, to laugh at you, and it was the stupidest and luckiest thing I've ever said because it made me listen to you. He took a step closer. I don't want to marry you anymore because of a bet, Renata, or out of caprice or pride. I want to marry you because since you played, my house stopped being dead. Because you gave me back my mother and music and the ability to feel something. I'm not offering you my fortune. I'm offering you the scared, repentant man beneath it, if you still want him. Renata looked at him for a long time, the violin of her father against her chest. The silence stretched. You hurt me a lot, she said finally. I know, and forgiveness isn't given in a day. I know. I'll wait as long as it takes. Then, for the first time in a long time, a small, true smile appeared on Renata's lips. But, she added, my dad always said that fear makes you play out of tune, and that people should be given the chance to hit the right note again. She took a step towards him. One chance, Maximiliano? Just one. Don't waste it. He didn't waste it. 6 months later, Renata Salazar stepped onto the stage of the National Theater again, the same one she had been heading to the night of the accident, the same one where her career had been broken. The hall was full. Don Augusto Belmonte had moved heaven and earth to organize the return of the miracle of the strings. In the front row, in the seat where her father had sat so many years ago, was Maximiliano, his eyes already moist before she played a single note. 2 rows behind, Doña Remedios clutched an embroidered handkerchief, and Tomas, in a new suit and a poorly tied tie, was beaming. Renata walked to the center of the stage with the violin her father had built. The white lights bathed her. For a moment, she closed her eyes, and instead of the screech of brakes and the shattering of glass, she heard Esteban Salazar's gentle voice. Play for those who are no longer with us, my daughter. Music is the only language that crosses to the other side. And she played as only those play who have lost everything and found their way back. The entire hall held its breath, just like that night in the Andrade salon. Only now no one was laughing. Now they wept from sheer beauty. And when she finished, 2,000 people rose to their feet in an ovation that seemed to last forever. Renata's gaze searched the front row. Maximiliano wept openly, applauding from his seat. And she knew, with a serene certainty, that her father was listening to them, both from the other side. They married in spring, in a simple ceremony, without half the false society that had once scorned her. Doña Remedios cooked the banquet and cried more than the bride. Tomas was the most awkward and happiest best man in history. And Jimena Castellanos, stripped of her position and entangled in lawsuits, was never invited anywhere again. On quiet nights, in the old music room of the mansion, which was never locked again, Renata played for Maximiliano the simple lullaby her father used to hum to her as a child, and the house that for 18 years had been dead with cold finally had warmth and music and life again. Because in the end, as Esteban Salazar used to say, music is the only language that crosses to the other side, and love sometimes is too. The end.